So let's talk about something huge, a single pre-dawn raid, just like that. And it completely redrew the map of global energy politics. It's a massive pivot, but what does it really mean for the world? And maybe more importantly, what are the stakes for a country like India? We're going to break it all down.
Seriously, can you imagine waking up to that headline? A full-on military intervention. And we're not just talking about removing a leader. This shattered decades of diplomatic norms. It's like the entire rulebook for the Western Hemisphere just got thrown out the window.
Okay, so to really get how we got here, you've got to understand Venezuela. This is a country that is literally sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. That's a huge deal. And that oil, it's been the source of its greatest wealth, but it's also been the root cause of its deepest, most bitter conflicts. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the line in the sand, that 2026 intervention. Then we'll rewind a bit to the oil-soaked history. We'll get into this new Donroe Doctrine, then zoom in on the view from New Delhi, and finally look at India's path forward. Okay, first up, a line in the sand. Let's dig into the operation itself. I mean, how did things get so extreme so fast? Sure, tensions had been simmering for ages, but the reality of boots on the ground? That caught almost everyone off guard. So the official story was that this was a surgical law enforcement operation. The charges? Narco-terrorism. Pretty serious stuff. But the execution was 100% military. This was a massive shift. For decades, the U.S. relied on economic pressure, on sanctions. This move basically said, okay, that's over. We're moving to direct action now. But, things like this never just happen out of the blue. This was the boiling point of a century-long, super complicated relationship, a relationship that was, from the very beginning, all about oil. It was built on it, and in the end, it was broken by it. And this timeline here, it really lays it all out. You can see the whole journey. It kicks off way back in 1912 with U.S. companies getting interested in Venezuelan oil. But the real turning point, what some call a structural break, is in 1999 with Hugo Chávez's election. After that, it's just a slow, steady ramp up from being partners to being in open conflict. Yeah, and this table shows you exactly how they did it. It wasn't one big hammer blow. It was a slow, methodical tightening of an economic noose. First, they went after individuals, freezing assets. Then, they cut off the money supply. Then, they targeted the entire oil industry. And finally, a full-on naval blockade. The thing is, none of it works to force a regime change, which is exactly what led to the military option in 2026. Okay, so this is crucial to understand. The intervention wasn't just about Venezuela. It was a signal to the entire world. It announced a whole new playbook for U.S. foreign policy, a much more aggressive one. And people are calling it the Donroe Doctrine, which is a pretty clever callback to an old idea. So you might remember the old Monroe Doctrine from history class, right? The one that basically told Europe to stay out of the Americas? Well, this isn't that. This is the Monroe Doctrine on steroids. It's an offensive take. It doesn't just say, stay out. It says, if you're already here, we're kicking you out. It's basically declaring Latin America an exclusive U.S. zone. And the goals? They're not hiding them. It's about energy, pure and simple. Control the oil. It's about geopolitics. Push rivals like China and Russia out of the backyard. And it's about economics. Make sure U.S. companies are the ones rebuilding everything. It's a straight-up power play. And look at the prize they're playing for. 18%. 18% of the entire world's proven oil reserves are in Venezuela. Let that sink in. That is more than Saudi Arabia, more than the U.S. and Russia combined. So yeah, getting control of that was a pretty big motivator. All right, so let's shift gears and look at this from New Delhi's perspective. For a country like India, which imports a ton of its energy, what's happening in Venezuela isn't some far-off news story. It's a huge deal. It hits right at the heart of their energy security and tests their famous Foreign Policy Balancing Act. And to really get where India is coming from, you have to see how different its relationship with Venezuela was. For China and Russia, it was all political, ideological, military allies, the whole nine yards. For India, it was business. It was pragmatic. It was about one thing, securing a reliable source of energy. They tried to stay out of the geopolitical chess game. And we're talking about a lot of business. At its peak, back in 2013, India was buying $13 billion worth of oil from Venezuela. That was 12% of all the oil India needed. So Venezuela wasn't just another supplier. It was an absolutely critical partner. But then, look what happened. Fast forward to 2025, and thanks to all those US sanctions, that $13 billion number just craters. It drops all the way down to 255 million. It's not even a shadow of what it used to be. This chart just shows that collapse so clearly. It's what experts call strategic decoupling. Basically, India saw the writing on the wall. To avoid getting hit by US secondary sanctions, they had to start looking for oil elsewhere. And while that was tough at the time, it turned out to be a really smart move because it protected them from the huge supply shock when the intervention finally happened. So even though India isn't buying much oil from there anymore, the strategic fallout is still massive. The bad news? Any big crisis like this makes global oil prices go wild, and India is vulnerable to that. The good news? Well, there's this weird silver lining. A new US-backed government might actually pay back $1 billion that Venezuela has owed India's state oil company for years. It's a perfect example of risk versus opportunity. So all of this puts New Delhi in a really tricky spot. They're stuck in the middle of what you could call a new kind of energy Cold War. So what's the game plan? How does India navigate this and protect its own interests? Well, it's a tightrope walk for sure. On one hand, they have to talk to Washington. They need to get that $1 billion back and hopefully get access to that oil again in the future. But on the other hand, they can't put all their eggs in one basket. They have to keep diversifying, strengthening ties with Russia and the Middle East. And through it all, they have to stick to their principles of not interfering and maintaining their strategic autonomy, basically not getting sucked into being on Team America or Team China/Russia. And this isn't just a one-off thing. Experts are warning that what happened in Venezuela, that's just a preview. They say we're heading into a future where these kinds of fights over raw materials and energy are only going to get more intense. And that really leaves us with the big, tough question. And it's not just for India, it's for every country out there. In an age of these new resource wars, when having energy is national security, what's the real cost of trying to go it alone? What's the price of that strategic autonomy? I mean, is it even possible to stay truly independent anymore?